When alcohol became illegal in 1920, few could predict just how dramatically the country would change. The 18th Amendment, backed by the Volstead Act, effectively criminalized a core aspect of American life. Overnight, it turned millions of ordinary citizens into lawbreakers. But while average Americans struggled with the sudden restrictions, the Mafia saw an unprecedented opportunity for profit and power. Prior to Prohibition, the Mafia in the United States was a scattered collection of ethnic street gangs, most of them rooted in immigrant enclaves. In cities like New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, these groups engaged in petty theft, gambling, extortion, and local protection rackets. Many of their members were recent immigrants from Sicily and southern Italy, steeped in a culture of secrecy and loyalty. Known by various names, La Mano Nera, the Black Hand, the Unione Siciliana, or simply the mob, they lacked organization and were frequently locked in violent turf wars. Prohibition changed that. The moment alcohol became illegal, the demand for it skyrocketed. The Mafia quickly mobilized. In Chicago, gangs coordinated with Canadian bootleggers to smuggle whiskey across the border. In New York, they took control of ports to import rum from the Caribbean. They set up secret distilleries in basements and rural barns, creating vast networks of distribution. But more than smuggling, the Mafia mastered corruption. They bribed customs agents, police officers, city councilmen, mayors, and even federal agents. In some neighborhoods, judges and prosecutors were completely under mob control. If money didn't work, violence followed. Speakeasies popped up across the country, sometimes hidden behind soda fountains, inside barber shops, or under restaurants. These establishments were often protected by the very authorities tasked with shutting them down. A complex dance of bribery and intimidation allowed them to flourish. In many cases, local governments and law enforcement actively collaborated with the Mafia. Political machines in cities like New York and Chicago relied on mob support to control votes, suppress opposition, and raise funds. In return, the Mafia was allowed to operate with near impunity. Al Capone became the most infamous figure of this era. Taking the reins from Johnny Torrio, Capone turned the Chicago outfit into a multi-million-dollar empire. He controlled over 10,000 speakeasies and numerous breweries. At the height of his power, his operation reportedly made over $100 million a year. That money bought unprecedented influence. Capone's people infiltrated the police, city hall, and the press. Even the mayor of Chicago, William Hale Thompson, was rumored to have been on the mob's payroll. Capone posed as a philanthropist, throwing lavish parties and donating to soup kitchens, which helped maintain a Robin Hood-like image, at least for a time. Meanwhile, in New York, the Mafia was undergoing a strategic transformation. The city was home to multiple powerful factions: Joe Masseria's group, Salvatore Maranzano's faction, and numerous other gangs. The conflict between Masseria and Maranzano culminated in a brutal power struggle known as the Castellamarese War. Amidst the chaos, a young and cunning mobster named Charles "Lucky" Luciano saw the flaws in the old system. The constant bloodshed and tribal loyalty were bad for business. Luciano had both bosses assassinated and established a new governing structure: the Commission. The Commission consisted of the heads of New York's 5 families: Luciano, later Genovese, Gambino, Colombo, Bonanno, and Lucchese, as well as influential bosses from Chicago, Philadelphia, Buffalo, and other cities. This was no longer a loose criminal network. It was a national corporation of crime with a clear hierarchy, written rules, and strict codes of conduct. Violence was only used when absolutely necessary. Disputes were settled diplomatically, and profit became the highest priority. With Prohibition in full swing, the Mafia maximized its gains. They controlled supply chains, bribed officials at every level, and invested in legitimate businesses as fronts. They operated massive underground casinos, ran prostitution rings, and skimmed profits from labor unions. Hollywood studios paid them to prevent labor strikes. Dock workers controlled by the mob could decide which goods got unloaded and which ships stayed at sea. Mob lawyers infiltrated city courts, while accountants laundered dirty money through banks and investment firms. Some cities were entirely under their control, functioning like mafia-run fiefdoms. In this climate of rampant corruption, the mafia thrived. Even the federal government struggled to make arrests that stuck. Jury tampering was common, witnesses vanished, judges were paid off or threatened. Investigations were stalled or sabotaged from within. Newspapers were bought, editors intimidated, and journalists silenced. The mafia's influence ran deep and wide, with many high-ranking politicians either complicit or powerless to resist. But the bubble couldn't last forever. In 1929, the brutality of mob life made national headlines with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Capone's men, dressed as police officers, executed 7 members of a rival gang in a Chicago garage. The public was horrified. Prohibition was no longer just about outlawing alcohol, it was clearly fueling organized crime. By 1933, the federal government had had enough. The 21st Amendment repealed prohibition, cutting off the mafia's most lucrative revenue stream. But by then, they had diversified. Labor racketeering, narcotics, illegal gambling, and union manipulation took center stage. The profits were still massive, but the days of unchecked expansion were over. In the decades that followed, cracks began to show. In 1957, the Appalachian Meeting, a secret gathering of over 100 mob leaders at a rural estate in upstate New York, was raided by state police. It was the first clear evidence to the public that the mafia was not just a myth or isolated criminal gangs, but a vast national network. This prompted renewed efforts from the FBI, which had previously downplayed or outright denied the mafia's existence. Under J. Edgar Hoover, surveillance, wiretaps, and informants began to chip away at the mafia's stronghold. The 1970 RICO Act allowed prosecutors to charge entire crime families as criminal enterprises. No longer could bosses hide behind layers of protection. One by one, they were arrested, convicted, or flipped by their own men. Today, the mafia still exists in fragments, but it will likely never return to its Prohibition-era peak. That brief period between 1920 and 1933 allowed them to entrench themselves in the very fabric of American society. With alcohol as the catalyst, they created an empire built on vice, violence, and influence so vast it blurred the line between government and gangland. And for over a decade, they got away with it all. Because they didn't just break the system, they became part of it. In recent years, sensational trials have captured the public's imagination as old mafia leaders faced justice. The stories told hand in hand with courtroom drama painted a vivid picture of the past atrocities and modern repercussions. Today, law enforcement agencies have evolved. On September 9, 2001, in some ways mirroring the way organized crime once infiltrated the streets. They have adopted new technologies, international cooperation, and intelligence sharing to tackle what remains. And while the mafia no longer stands as the invincible force it once was, the echoes of its reign during those 13 years of untamed ambition still resonate. Even now, as crime evolves and new threats emerge, the challenge remains the same: ensuring the balance of power, justice, and freedom for all. In this, we understand the lessons of the past, so we are not doomed to repeat them.